Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Andrei Shevchenko, and on behalf of the team of Ukraine Media Center Ukrinform, I want to thank all the journalists who tell the world about our fight for freedom. This time we are having a special event, and we will be talking about Russian propaganda, about the use of social networks, and we will be talking about Telegram. And I invite Svitlana Slipchenko, the manager of VoxCheck project, to start our conversation. Miss Svitlana, 1, 2, everything seems to be working. I wanted to start with why we're talking specifically about Telegram, because it seems that information threat may arise in different social platforms, in different media, but us, with our colleagues in VoxCheck, we picked within the last month Telegram channels as the main focus of our work. As you said, Internews investigation proved about Ukrainians, about the consumption of their media and content. Ukrainians pick 60% of Ukrainians pick Telegram as the source of news, and the social networks, they are ahead of TV and other sources of information. And me and our colleagues, we focused on Telegram as on that potential entry point for Russian disinformation, for Russian propaganda. However, the story of Telegram starts a couple of days before the full-scale invasion, when Suspilny News started asking us to verify certain photos of video which would witness the movement of Russian material in Donbass, and those videos were mostly circulating in Telegram. Me and my colleagues, we've seen that the sources of spreading those videos are the Russian or pro-Russian sources, and then those videos get into local publics and circulate around Telegram channels. And just a couple of days before the 24th of February, we started digging about what's going on in Telegram. So we came up with an investigation of 59 Russian and pro-Russian channels. We documented 5,500 cases of disinformation and formulated 19 narratives of Russian propaganda. Are those known narratives? Oh yeah, they are. Those are the external management and bio laboratories and Ukrainian military committing crimes. They are very well-known narratives, but the purpose of our investigation was to show that the right channels that try to mimic Ukrainian resources, they try to write pro-Ukrainian content or provide so-called alternative information, but our investigation demonstrated that they just translate the Russian narratives. There was a lot written about Telegram by Detector Media and the Center for Countering Disinformation. They were putting together the list of such Telegram channels. So that work done by Detector Media and Center for Countering Disinformation was the basis for us for a more profound research that helped us to find those ties, those connections. Myroslava, Markova, those narratives that Svitlana was just talking about, they're not only translated in Telegram. So why is there such an intense attention to Telegram? Thank you. We focused on those sources mimicking Ukrainian sources, how they try to be more manipulative or using some complicated methods to promote the Russian narratives. I will explain a little bit how we divided our sources into Russians and pro-Russians, because sometimes it's very difficult to tell one from another. As Russians, we classified those channels that state that their authors are Russians and their audience is Russians. So they were openly positioned, and we classified as pro-Russians those which mimic Ukrainian either media or that call themselves Ukrainian blogs, because some of them are blogs and who try to so-called inform Ukrainian audience stating that they are Ukrainian channels, and they promote those narratives in a manipulative manner. We had 41 Russian and 18 pro-Russian channels, and we took into account the popularity, the number of subscribers. And the most interesting is that if the narratives are already well known and many of them are spread around the other platforms, and Russia uses them in their ecosystem of state media, the pro-Russian channels are those which mostly try to promote those narratives indirectly. They try to sow the distrust to Ukrainian sources of information, that the truth is like a flexible concept, and the truth is being replaced by lies. And the most popular among those narratives are those that we identified in both Russian and pro-Russian channels. The most popular were about the hazardous biological laboratories in Ukraine, and there were more than 900 cases of such information. And about the terroristic actions of Ukrainian military, the direct statement is that Ukraine is the terrorist state. Also more than 900 cases of disinformation and more fakes to justify the Russian aggression against Ukraine, about the causes of invasion and the Ukrainian policy that led to Russia's reaction, more than 400 cases. And very demonstrative is that more than 300 cases of disinformation were about Ukraine setting up the food crisis throughout the world, which is very widespread narrative by both Russian and pro-Russian media, is that Ukrainians want to join Russia, more than 300 cases, and most of them were related to pseudo-referendum in temporarily occupied territories, but there were more cases which were trying to demonstrate the mass support of Russian armed forces by Ukrainian population, and very widespread narrative also, and which is interesting also, it was promoted by pro-Russian media, is the denial that Russia commits military war crimes in Ukraine. Okay, Mr. Vadym Miskyi, program director at Detector Media. Mr. Vadym, well, with the beginning of the full-scale war, we started to document every single fake that we would be able to identify on Telegram. We invested a lot in such systems that allow us to do it automatically, and so that every fake and manipulation to be denied, we try to aggregate everything on our website to deliver this information to our audience, and our colleagues from VoxCheck and the Center for Countering Disinformation and other fact-checking organizations, they help us in this, and also foreign media, they try to deny it in their countries, and such cases they show the complexity of Russian propaganda. Why Telegram is actual in Ukraine? Because the Western world, in my opinion, is more protected from such blunt method of influence, because Telegram is not so popular, for example, in America or Western Europe, and those social platforms which are popular there, their management, they are more prone to dialogue and to protection against disinformation in their platforms, for example, Facebook, Twitter. Now there are new risks emerging due to the new owner, but the dialogue is still in progress. They are being pulled to Senate or Congress. The European Commission says something about that, so it's not the case with Telegram, which is registered in the jurisdictions who don't really need it, and due to the stance of their owners, they evade this discussion, and all the propagandists, they get on Telegram, and Telegram feels comfortable in Ukraine. And during this critical moment, when there is a certain breaking point in the media consumption habits, now that the usual sources of information get in the background, now Telegram is in the first place, so it's very actual for us. Well, I will add just one last thing, that since the beginning of the war, we documented that Russia invests a lot of resources in there. Russia created a network of hyper-local channels aimed at the occupied territories that they were planning to occupy. We identified such network. For example, the channel which was called Eavesdropped in Bucha, so they were planning to occupy Bucha, and they created channel for Bucha and Vasilkiv. So where those operations were successful, those channels, they remain some factor of influence. So, but we understand that obviously nobody in Bucha reads it. We also remember there was a list of channels published by SBU, and then based on that, based on our list that we put together in the spring last year for the forecast of the newly occupied territories, we promulgated a list of Russian and pro-Russian channels, about 300 of them. We analyzed the narratives in more detail there, but based on those narratives which were circulating within certain time, we identified 300 channels like those, and it's far from end. And the work in those areas is very important because it lets us put the puzzle together.
Ms. Vorotyntseva is a senior analyst of the Countering Disinformation Center at the NSDC. We have heard a lot of information so far for the government to draw some conclusions. I will add that, of course, government bodies are also taking advantage of the Telegram channels to draw some information and inform the Ukrainian population. What your take on that would be? To begin with, I would add the message that the number of these channels are limitless. We cannot encounter and calculate all of them. Dozens of thousands of people working on them, including AI, a lot of developed software. We are also recording the fact that a number of those channels have been transformed and transported into the news channels. When you subscribe to this news channel, for the first time, you may have an impression that this is the same kind of news that you read in a number of news outlets. But at some point in time, you will detect that the new kind of content is appearing. This is not something that is new, but very specific trend that began in spring. All the propagandists that we know, hundreds of channels that we know, they quote each other. They have been targeting the general population, then targeted their activities into the news outlet channel, and you cannot calculate all of them. They are springing up and keep on growing. The Telegram, for example, let me phrase it the following way. Since the invasion in the Donbass in 2014, Russia was taking advantage of the channels such as Odnoklassniki and other Russian channels. Ukraine was not able to adequately respond. We lost that ground even before engaging the enemy. Now, given the information policy of this country, a major part of the Ukrainian segment is oriented on the Ukrainian official news channel. This is quite an achievement. Since the year 2022, when we saw so many people subscribing to the Telegram channels, now we can say that this is an information warfare in this particular information segment. We are using the different kinds of software, measuring and gauging the Ukrainian and pseudo-Ukrainian and Russian channels. We are gauging that kind of information. What we see is that in some information narratives, some information battles, sometimes the result is not always a draw, but mainly we are taking the advantage of winning. We are taking the upper hand in that warfare. The Ukrainian segment is growing. Can you put that in the words that are not depletives? I will call that the battles of the narratives, that warfare. In many areas, Ukraine is getting an upper hand. Sometimes we are even. Some areas are where we are losing, but in general, the situation is quite positive. Ukraine effectively is not investing a lot of resources into that. Russia, on the other hand, is an information machine. When we begin discussing these issues in the open public, you can talk to a computer bot and you will not notice that you are talking to a robot, to a machine. You are using your emotions and you're sapped. Mr. Belousov works at the School of Digital Security, DSS 380. A couple of messages to add. And why is it that the Telegram is the hot topic of today? When you compare it with the Facebook or Twitter, they are not the benchmark where we can say that they are free of all the fakes. But we heard that people are called up to the Congress investigations, to Congress commissions, but there are some ways to get down to the truth of the event. In the Russia Today, for example, you saw the inscription that this channel is fully funded by the Russian government. We understand what that is. Facebook, for example, since some time, I think it harks back to COVID times when you saw the inscriptions and warning, be aware, the COVID campaign is underway. There are some technologies used. People are clicking on some references. Some are not clicking on the reference leading to some chipping procedures. At the Telegram, you don't have that kind of procedure. You cannot double-check any information. If you spread the information on the Facebook, a link, then Facebook will inform you that this domain has been registered a month ago or a decade ago. That gives you some kind of assurances as to whether this source of information should be trusted. The other source of verification can be the number of subscribers, leading to some conditions of verification. That's one thing. The other component is that the Telegram, apart from the fact that people are using different kinds of messengers as a way to inform their relatives and their loved ones, it takes only one click away from the general channels of information. They're integrated, they're interwoven. So the second point is that the Telegram as a tool is very useful, given the fact that you can monitor information, analyze information, spread information. As my colleagues have suggested, they're monitoring the narratives from outside, but there are people who are creating such narratives, and they're very good at making sure that they know who their audiences are. They're well aware that this message goes down good. This message doesn't get so much subscriptions. This one is not working at all. In the Facebook, messages are blocked very fast. In the Twitter, and this is relatively speaking, there are some tools, including the fact that when a person is blocked, he or she is able to set up a new account, but they will not be able to contact you. You can check that box that this person is blocked, and all their accounts will be unavailable to them in terms of getting through to you. That's the way it's working. Questions from the floor? Maria Gonchar, Ukrinform. I have a question to the representative of the NSDC. Are you developing the methods of countering Russian propaganda? How can you keep track of that, and how can you refute their messages? The Counter Disinformation Center is working on that. Over the last year, we blocked more than 100 channels including the Russian well-known channels. We are working with a number of bodies, and we seem to be very good. Not that all our requests are satisfied when we are arguing very good, and we know and get the message across what is harmful in that particular channel. Our requests are met. We are also working with the international corporations, news media, and news outlets. Over the last month, we identified 300 channels that mimic the European channels. If, for example, you are a German speaker or a Spanish speaker, and you look for some kinds of news, you find a site that looks like a real, authentic news media outlet written in a very good Spanish or German. But if you keep reading that particular channel, you will see everything, every narrative that Russia is pushing, the Nazis, the fact that Ukrainian women who are depriving their husbands of their legal wives and children, all this trash is being promoted. This is what we are working at. If you have something to add about the YouTube, that would be a very good point. More questions? If there are no questions, I will spring in. One of my colleagues in the Western outlet published an information about what's going at the Nord Stream 2. And they referenced the fact that the Russian reconnaissance and subversive groups were working in Europe. What I thought of is that these Russian groups do not communicate with each other except one channel, the Telegram channel. What's your take on that, whether the Telegram has become a very effective means of Russian communication? There are some signs that we cannot either refute or approve, that there are signs that Telegram is completely reliable or is not controlled by the Russian FSB. Theoretically speaking, if otherwise has not been proven, then it's a positive answer. One of the messengers that we are using, by default, they're using the anti-encryption when all the messages are encoded and are kept on your smartphone. This is done by default, something that is not working on the Telegram channel by default. The chats that we are using are synchronized with the server of the Telegram, and some mode they are kept. What kind of mode of keeping that information is something we don't know. The Telegram claims that they are the open source technology, and they can tell you and open the information, but they will not let you know what the way the server is working, since this is a commercial secret. This is similar to something when you buy a canned food in the shop, when Europe said that everything is open here, and you see that this is a canned maize, and the content of that particular can will not be described, but you are assured that everything is open, everything is natural. The same goes for the Telegram. What's going on at or in the server, we don't know. Perhaps that information is analyzed because maybe they failed to do that. Some channels have been blocked, some channels have been opened. Then the Russian authorities claim that they have no issue with Telegram. They're not pressing it. These are all signs to testify the fact and to presume that there is some cooperation with the Russian government. Either we are talking about the keys of access, or some FSB officers receive some information. But technically speaking, we know that this is possible. All this, in an indirect way, tells us that Telegram should not be particularly trusted. There are other means and tools of communication. FSB officers, as you claim, the subversive groups perhaps communicate through these channels. And perhaps this is done for the top brass of the SBU to keep track of that kind of communication. We understand that in the digitized world, there are no safe tools. Everything is possible, but given the fact that the source of information or conditional or unconditional cooperation with the Russian government, the lack of the availability of the full source, all the jurisdiction issues testify to the fact that major, serious channel, the Telegram is not the most reliable one. There are more trusted channels, and there are reasons to trust other channels. Do we have other questions from the floor? In case there isn't, I've got a final question. What would be your recommendation for the Ukrainian state to do to stand up to the plate, to reiterate the Ukrainian government is very actively engaged and using the Telegram channels to inform officially the Ukrainian public? What your take would be and your recommendation for the Ukrainian authorities? What the government can do is the way to counter disinformation channel. We see that there are a lot of narratives circulating in the net. The same narratives are used by Russia to inform foreign audience. It's about talking heads. It's about who deepens such narratives. The Ukrainian government can do a lot to counter those narratives, to counter narratives that are smear campaign against Ukraine. That's one thing. On the other hand, it's a public awareness to make sure that public does the double checking, it is able and challenged to see what kind of information we are using. These skills should be reared from the school. I don't think it should be starting at the earlier or senior school, perhaps is the best way to go. We should also be targeting, apart from particular pupil population, but some professional experts in terms of media hygiene, media awareness, to be sure to critically analyze and also discriminate between the enemy narrative, something that is very dangerous for the Ukrainian narrative, and to be able to single out the authentic kind of information. Other recommendations? I think the major thing that the state can do in one or the other area of media awareness, the work has been underway. It's an issue of the resources allocated by the government. If we compare the resources that is available to Ukraine and the number of resources that Russia is investing into its propaganda machine, the difference is breathtaking. And it's not only about the propaganda machine. We are also including the policymakers, talking heads, the members of their parliaments, the members of parliaments in other European countries. It is picked up by the media, the diplomatic corps. For example, a very fresh example, the hot one, Arte France, that has been banned recently. Banned is not the good word. Their bank accounts have been freezed. They have been banned to broadcast in the European Union, but those journalists sitting in France, they were generating the content and transmitting it to the Africa part that is Francophone, and a lot of people in the global south, in that particular part of the world, where we are facing quite challenging and daunting situation with our understanding. There are a lot of venomous information that is spreading there. We can only guess how they mimic that French-speaking channels. What I think we can do more effectively is something that is becoming very voguish now, the threat banking, where we are not refuting some fake information, but rather by showing something that these fakes are part of some narratives, we are in advance warning population and audience that something in this vein is something that you are likely to hear. I believe this is a very good preventive method. It has saved a lot of Ukrainian media campaign. There are a lot of people who have heard such kind of narrative, they will not believe them anymore.
I will add just a couple of words. When we distribute our resources, we work very actively with the international audience. We have partners in European countries whom we work with, who communicate information to us, and we communicate it the other way around. And we work with a targeted audience of verifiers of information abroad who see a lot. So we branch out our expertise in foreign languages, because previously we only worked with English level audience only, and thus in this close collaboration with European and non-European partners who speak European languages, so that was related to European projects, and we segment our efforts in Ukraine too, and talking to average citizens who don't have such professional information as we do in terms of consumption of the news of the media sources. So we tell them to trust only to the verified sources of information, any news sources, any news channels, any gossips, insights. If you see any insight, well, you know, even my mom remembers it. So when she sees something like that, it means that it's something, another legitimate right in front of her. Pavlo, Belousov, Vadym Miskyi, Maryna Vorotyntseva, Myroslava, Markova, Svitlana, Slipchenko. Thank you for this conversation. We were talking about Russian propaganda and use of social platforms and Telegram. Thank you for all the information you've shared. I invite everybody to follow the announcements of Media Center Ukraine. In 17 minutes, we will have a meeting with the deputy head of the president office, Yaroslav Shurma, Stand with Ukraine.